The White Temple. Story and Art by T. White. It was a sunny day as I walked down a trail heading for Langendock. Suddenly, a voice spoke from behind a grove of aspen trees. The wind blows where it wills, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know whence it comes or whither it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of spirit. As I walked into the woods following the voice, there was a dandy, beautifully attired with a huge feather sticking out of his hat. He was a bit strange, for he was speaking to the birds, and a couple of them were on his shoulder. I crouched down and listened to his speech. Over the face of heaven did the Heavenly Father hurl his might, and lo, he did leave a river of stars in his wake. We invoke the bright and glorious stars that wash away all things of fear and bring health and life unto all creation. He paused. He sensed my presence, and he twirled around and he stared at me, for I truly was an intruder, but no matter, he welcomed me into his circle with delightful flattery. He was a curious vagabond, and a little unnerving, for he offered to guide me on my quest before I even asked him to. As we traveled down the way, everything became bright and colorful. There was a song in the air with gaiety and delight. The crisp breeze of the Mediterranean kissed my face, and the bold yellow sun of Langendock warmed my soul. We were heading to a small village when we spotted a man sitting on a rock, contemplating a deep thought. He had a fine figure, a proud carriage, a very imposing breadth of brow, and his speech was filled with charm and delight. My vagabond dandy seemed to know him quite well, and I was pleased to meet such a fine figure of a man. "My good friend Abelard, what are you digesting on this beautiful day?" said the dandy. "Ah, my good friend, I am lamenting about Eros' golden arrow. Love, love, love. That makes your head spin wildly, and your heart beats like a savage drum chant. What manner of man must I be to lose all love of philosophy, and run and chase after Aphrodite's follies? And yet I willingly seek her kisses. I find it hard to believe that you, the great man, orator, philosopher, educator, would be snared by Cupid's bow," said the dandy. "But Francis, all men are dumb when beauty pleaded, for beauty is as sweet and musical as bright Apollo's lute," said Abelard. "When love speaks, the voice of all the gods makes heaven drowsy with the harmony. So who is this divine Venus that makes you kneel at her feet?" said the dandy. "She is Eve, enchanting, the first woman made by God, a virgin, with body and soul kissed by the angels. I saw her from afar, but I always knew her in my dreams. She was 16, a young girl, and I was determined to unite her with myself in the bonds of love. My name was so distinguished that I possessed such advantages of youth and stature that no matter what woman I might favor with my love, I dreaded rejection of none. I was aflame with passion for this maiden. I sought to discover means whereby I might have daily and familiar speech with her, thereby the more easily to win her consent. Why should I say more? We were united first in the dwelling that sheltered our love, and then in the heart that burned within us. What had begun with simple physical desire graduated through her delicacy into a tenderness surpassing in sweetness the most fragrant balm. It was a new experience for me, and wooed me quite from philosophy. I borrowed passion from my lectures for my love, and left them anomalously dull. I felt as if Socrates had sinned, but I sang love songs at her window," said Abelard. "Well, that is quite a statement from such a fine scholar as you. Perhaps you would join us on our journey to Langendock and continue with your philosophies, dear Abelard, and help this friend I met on the road of life," said Francis the dandy. I was a child, seeing and hearing something new, and what a delight that he was joining us on this journey to the fabled land. It was a long walk to the gates of Langendock, and Abelard stroked the dandy to give a poem to break the monotony of the walk, a contest of memory and prose. With a gesture of hand and body, he spoke his song. "When she recklessly gave herself wholly unto love and me, beauty in heaven afar laughed from her joyous star. Two great desires hath overwhelmed me. My heart's not great enough for this huge joy that overmastered me. With time my love made in her arms another man of me, and all the gathered honey of her lips drained in one yielded kiss. Again, again, I dream the freedom given of her soft breast, and so am come, another God, to heaven among the rest. Yea, and serenity would govern God and men, if I might find again my hand upon her breast. Ah, you fine dandy, you know of my plight, and you, my fine friend, what have you to add along the journey?" said Abelard. I was caught off guard, for I did not want to be the fool. I needed to impress to join this fine group, so I sang of a divine idea. Mankind arises from one virgin. We are alike both outwardly and inwardly. Our mouths are sated with the selfsame fare, and when their bones into confusion fall, say ye, who knew the living man by sight, which is the villain now, in which the night that worms have gnawed their carcasses so bare. Christians, Jews, and the heathens, serve they all, and God has all creation in his care, said I. A silence overcame the group, but it was a good silence, for I had pleased them with my song. The gateway to Languedoc, we had reached it, and there, standing like a rock, immovable, hard and strong, was a knight blocking our path. I realized he was a Templar, his cross displayed in bright red on his tunic, truly his badge of courage. He was old and scared, but his stature shone like the morning sun. Abelard and Francis were quite timid and did his bidding and even offered to accompany him on his quest. The knight proved to be a noble creature, and his speech was quite eloquent. He claimed to be of the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Chivalry was born in this valley, and many a great knight was raised with the credo of knighthood. A knight was to be a hero, a gentleman, and a saint. He pledged always to speak the truth and protect the poor. Montsegur, a citadel, impregnable, haunting, and home to the treasure of the Cathars. The knight was welcomed into the castle with open arms. Merriment and song, gaiety and joy filled the air. The people were quite beautiful, considering what the rest of the world was about. On the borders of Languedoc were misery, plague, and starvation. Their dress was delightful, and the women intoxicating with their perfume and long flowing hair. Beautiful gowns, with bright and colorful designs depicting Mother Earth in all her splendor. One could forget everything just to gaze at their beauty. Their wise men were dressed in fine white linen, very similar to the Brotherhood of the Dead Sea, and they were also Gnostic in belief. The Gnostics were there from the beginning of Christianity, but were branded heretics by the great church. If one killed a Cathar, he would gain indulgence, and surely enter the kingdom of heaven. Their concept of God was very original and solved a riddle that mankind doesn't understand. Why is God so cruel? Why such misery, sickness, disease, war, famine? Where is God? To the Cathar it was quite simple. They believed Satan created the earth. All matter, the physical, is his. God created the spirit, soul. God is only in you as a spirit. God has no power on earth to save you from destruction. God is like a wooden bowl of soup. When it is eaten, all that is left is the fragrance emanating from the bowl. The Cathars welcomed all faiths and philosophies, and because of that openness their culture thrived, while the rest of the world was in turmoil. As we wandered through the town, my eyes became bewitched by the most dazzling creature I had ever seen. Her hair was like spring, and her curls were formed like ambrosia locks. Her skin was porcelain, and her body sculpted by Pygmalion. I was struck dumb by her beauty. Her hand reached out to us, and we followed her into a white temple. It was a beautiful building of stone, and in the center was a large pyramid with the symbol of the Ankh, and beside it was the Grand Master, welcoming us into his domain with a sincere blessing and bidding us to enter. He noticed my gaze at the wonder of the beautiful lady who welcomed us. I could not take my eyes off her. He pitied me and drew me near him to break my trance. Son, you have been bewitched by Helen. Her beauty is so fair that it is a curse on her soul. In her past life, she was as beautiful as you see her, and many suitors died at her feet to win her favor. One suitor took her for his own. He was strong, a Spartan lord, and invincible. He took her across the sea and made her submit to his will. She would have plunged her dagger into her bosom to escape his cruelty, but in her prayers, the goddess she followed bid her to be patient and wait for the wind to change. Her only happiness was the Arcadian forest where she could be alone with the forest creatures. She truly could hear the lute of Pan and smell the healing herbs of the forest. She learned to listen to Mother Earth and lay on her surface and felt the earth pulsating with life. It was then that she realized that life dies in the winter but is resurrected in the spring. We mortals die but are reborn on the path to perfection, and so she waited until the wind changed. Sparta was a cruel city with no art, music, or pleasure to soothe the soul. Their god was war, and they were hard from it. They would take the young boys and turn them into stone, hard and rigid, seeking glory and blood for Ares, their god. The wind was changing. One could feel the cold air swirling through Sparta, and war was beating its drum to entice the warrior blood. As they marched out of the city, leaving the women and children, Helen knew it was time, and she fled until she reached the sea. She did what she had to, for a man will sell oneself for pleasure, and so she sailed to her land and into her family's arms. Perhaps you have heard of the legend of Troy and the great battle fought there years ago. It was not Helen's fault what happened to that glorious city, but the legend blames her for the end of that fabled city. She has transmigrated for years like the seasons, to die and be reborn in the spring. Reincarnation is the essence of our journey, for it gives us a second chance to perfect our spirit, to gain and become closer to the divine. I have studied your ways, and your logic is sound, but it is hard to find proof, said I. My son, why can a 5-year-old play a musical instrument better than a man who has spent a lifetime studying music? Why are some gifted and not others, even though they were raised in the same house? The proof is everywhere. Mother Earth is in a constant rebirth. You just have to open your eyes to the cosmic stream. Helen knows her past life and is haunted by it and blames herself. For the golden palace that died in her tears, so she wanders, searching for redemption for her sins. As I contemplated her fate, my heart went out to her, but I was distracted as the master led us into another chamber. As we entered, I could hear a sweet and melodic sound I had never heard before, and the ceiling was dazzling with jewels and crystals hanging from golden chains. The walls were decorated with beautiful frescoes depicting Mother Earth and her creatures. The art created a soothing and healing quality that I never knew could be expressed by painting on a wall. The knight was struck dumb and fell to his knees. Abelard and Francis became extremely quiet and seemed in a trance. The floor was Caracara marble, with beautiful pillows of silk and satin filling the room, and in the center was a man, seated on a large brocade pillow trimmed in gold, playing that melodic sound that sent shivers up my spine. Long ago, their order had realized that music, color, and art soothed the savage beast and healed many of man's maladies. To restore the soul, one should address the senses, as when one perceives beautiful figures and forms or hears beautiful music. Through rhymes and melodies, one can restore the pristine harmony of the faculties of the soul. By various speeds, magnitudes, and intervals, arranged with reference to each other in a certain musical ratio, one could produce a convoluted motion, most musical and gentle, and by fixing one's hearing, one could grasp the universal harmony and consonance of the spheres and stars. One could then hear of the sublime symphonies of the world producing a melody fuller and more intense than anything affected by mortal sounds. I was about to speak when a most delightful event took place. A dove flew in from the skylight and landed on my shoulder. The master was impressed, and he felt I was a kindred spirit with the Rosicrucians, for they believed compassion and kindness makes the wild things want to be near. For the creatures of nature are our younger brothers, perhaps not as defined and complicated as we, but they possess a greater understanding of Mother Earth, and we believe there is no greater purpose than to reach down with the care and love for our younger brothers. After all, Jesus the Divine was born with our younger brothers in a cave-like barn, and he and his brother James followed the Nazarene way, reverence for life. The Master allowed us to remain in the White Temple for as long as we wanted, even providing lodging, and if we wanted, we could join in many of the meditation. Helen entered and bid us follow her up the stone steps to the top of the temple. There were over 100 steps, as I watched her graceful body ascend to the terrace above. Seeing the city from above was breathtaking. Down below, stallions, black and white, Arabians with colorful riders parading by waiting ladies on their mezzanines. To the far right, vineyards, orchards, and the grand palace with its canopies and flags waving. One might think all is well in the world. Her hair was ebony, and her features were sharp and crisp, and it was a fine day to talk to her. She looked at me, and for an eternity, I was forever in her spell as we walked along the temple roof. As we talked, I realized her beauty was wasted on her, for she was cursed. She had made love to many men who sought to possess her, to own her, to abuse her for the very thing she had that they didn't have: beauty, love, and kindness. She told me she had lived in the White Temple for over a decade. repenting for her sins, studying the Rosy Cross, and seeking sanctuary from the outside world. She was quite happy being here, but knew that at the gates of Langendock, forces were at work to destroy this dream. For as we looked out over the city and beyond, we could see large clouds of smoke filling the sky. She was trembling, and her complexion turned white with fear. "Oh my God," she said, "it is on its way." I didn't need to ask what she meant. As her body moved into my arms, I knew the end of Montségur was near. The Pope, the vicar on earth, was nursing his swollen toe from gout, but still had time to rally his army to the gates of Langendock. He and the King of France were hungry, their subjects were in revolt, plague and famine ruled the day, and Gnostic ideas were spreading like wildfire through his own domain. 30,000 knights and foot soldiers had descended on town after town to burn and loot and kill. It was a whirlwind, and every man, woman, and child was put to the sword. In the town of Béziers, at least 15,000 men, women, and children were slaughtered, many of them in the sanctuary of the church itself. At the gate of the city, the general asked the Pope how he might distinguish heretics from true believers. The reply was, "Kill them all, God will recognize his own." The White Temple was in a state of confusion. Meditation stopped, the chambers went idle, and by fate or chance we were now a part of the crisis. The Pope's army was restless. The knights were in a fever pitch to conquer and condemn, but they still had to pass through a valley closed in by wooded hills on all sides, and cross a mighty river with overhanging rock and caves. The Grand Master and Helen departed to a tower high above, with a crystal cathedral, to study the stars. I knew where and why they were studying the stars, for the Order was well versed in the evolutionary career of mankind and is bound up with the divine hierarchies who rule the planets and the signs of the zodiac. The planets, through the 12 signs of the zodiac, mark man's progress in time and space, and with the proper sensitivity, one could foretell one's fate at a particular time. Perhaps not totally accurately, but one could get a premonition of things to come. When Helen and the Master descended to inform us of our fate, she spoke, for truly she was a seer, branded a witch by the church. She said, "Deep in some porous rock and filled with acrid smoke, the bees within, alarmed for their community, scurry about the waxed castle and raise their temper with high-pitched buzzing. Born in the wind, thunderbolts threaten the earth with deluge into the valley, and calamity will befall the war-weary knights. A widespread flood cuts off one's escape route, the steep walls to contain the lost souls. Now two meet together to fight it out in single combat, exchanging lance and advancing with sword and shield, and the earth groaned beneath the encounter." If the armies of the damned march through the valley of the hermit, and the stars shake the clouds, a deluge will occur, and the armies will vanish into the depths of the river. Days later, our fate would be sealed by her prophecies, for the armies of the Pope marched to the entrance of the valley of the hermit, and with pride and arrogance entered the deep dark valley. The knight and I were given the best stallions of Montségur, and swiftly rode to watch the advancing knights. We perched ourselves on the highest cliff, and there, with the help of an amazing invention called a spyglass, watched the drama unfold. Whirling spirals and thunderbolts in the heavens above, boulders rolling straight down from the cliffs above, and yet the armies marched on to cross the cursed valley before fear gripped the hearts of the anguished mortals. As my spyglass surveyed the events, I spotted a lone figure standing on a heavenly crag. It was she, watching the drama below. She was shouting, and I could see her lips and I could hear her prayers. "I swear by earth, by sea, by sky, let the fates be strong, and save my fair city, with the White Temple, and the mortal souls therein." So sped the spawn of fear in the hearts of the knights below. A crackling thunderbolt struck near her, and a gigantic tree fell into the valley. The clouds opened up a deluge, and a sea of water filled the valley as the bees went wild. I can't say I had any remorse for their mortal souls. They had trampled thousands using God as their shield. But as the waters receded, many of the rats were still left as they marched out of the valley to dry land. The great knight leading them was the champion, gallant and true, and perhaps caught in the fates of mortal man's foolish desires and ideas. He gathered his troops before the setting sun and built large bonfires from the debris, as we watched all night long the whirling spire of flames leaping upwards in the night. wondering what the day would hold. And like a ghost, Helen entered through the dark curtain of night. It's a short reprieve from death, a mere breathing space for us who are doomed. But it is possible to prolong this incarnation, to give us time to learn and know. A reprieve if we can find a champion to hurl against their great knight, she said. Good lady, are you suggesting a trial by ordeal the will of God? Said the knight. Yes, for his army is in tatters. He has consented if our champion wins the battle, the knights leave Languedoc, and on the other hand, if their champion wins, then they will march on and show no pity to Montsegur, and I am to be the hostage and his prize. My God, lady, are you sacrificing yourself for redemption? What champion could there possibly be who could conquer this great knight? The people of the White Temple are gentle and kind. They have no champion. Would it not be better to close up the city, for the citadel has never been breached? I have watched him. He is a mountain, a Spartan born, and he moves like a cat, said I. Yes, he is their champion, and no one in Montsegur could challenge him, and there is only one with the cunning and knowledge of war that could best him. In the old days, I dreamed of such a hero who could risk it all for beauty. The White Temple and the gentle people of this blessed land deserve a champion to fight off the evil forces of hell, she said. Out of the mist of darkness the voice spoke firm and strong. This will be my grail, my search has ended, said my friend the knight. I had learned to love the old knight, but to be our champion, to risk Helen and the fury of this black army, there had to be another choice. In my younger days, I had many triumphs, and I faced death and agony. My body is worn with scars of fading vanity. I had the courage, but lacked temperance, and paid the price. But victory did not elude me, and this will be my stand, my last battle with shield and sword. I am a Templar, and of a grand order to protect maidens and the helpless. And with divine blessing, I humbly ask for your scarf, dear maiden, said the knight. She gladly offered it, and then, like a ghost, disappeared in the dark. As the clouds rolled round and the moon appeared in our play, I could see her shadow walking to her fate on the battlefield. Hard to believe that a woman of such beauty could be such a tower of strength. A good omen. My gallant friends arrived, Francis and Abelard. There was a great fog covering the valley, and slowly the sun burned it off to expose the battlefield. They were in a perfect row, stretched out along the riverbank, and their great knight was preparing his weapons, as his squire made ready his stallion. Fear crept into my bones. This seemed unreal. Everything was in slow motion, men walking casually, preparing the battlefield. Abelard, Francis, and the knight discussing the weapons they had brought. God, they were frightening objects, sharp as a razor, hard and strong steel to penetrate mortal flesh. The knight was changing his armor for the glorious battlefield suit, when I saw he had no hand. Strange. I ran to the woods with such an overwhelming sickness that my breakfast was discharged on the forest floor. The reality of this play was deadly serious, and my mortal being was at stake. For a moment, panic entered my mind. Run, run, escape. Never to return to this land. It was a defining moment. Stay with truth and beauty, or crawl away in shame. Thunder broke my spell. A drumbeat, pounding drums echoed through the valley of death. It was a strange parade, a scholar, a troubadour, a young man searching for wisdom, and a one-handed Templar on a magnificent stallion leading the way. This could be my last day on earth. If Helen was right, I was on the threshold of discovering a new life without this body. I was happy with it. It was strong and fit, it moved well, and I was attractive enough to turn a few heads. As I swirled out of my body, wondering if I had learned enough to be welcomed into this ever-changing spiral to the divine, or will I be welcomed as a non-event, a slug on the path to nowhere? What would I take? What one belief had I learned? What pearl of wisdom had I reached? It came to me with such clarity. I belonged to the White Temple, a place where all of creation was delivered from a glorious hand, and I would be a steward, a caretaker of kindness and compassion to the meek of the earth, to the rabbit, bird, or stag of the forest, and also to the lion and the wolf, for the day will come when a little child will lead them, and they shall all eat straw on God's holy mountain. I was ready now for my fate. My body was just a shell, waiting for a more glorious march to the divine. With arms of Vulcan, he moved through the camp, and you could hear war cries, awaiting a quick victory. His black steed was pacing back and forth as they put his final chainmail around his neck. They hoisted him on the warring horse, and he looked glorious and invincible. Our champion was serene, at peace, moving slowly to the battlefield. 3 times he galloped around the Templar, shouting, "Your kingdom will be mine!" A formidable helmet with plumes like fountains of fire, massive and ruddy-colored, was he and his spears. Shields and sword were the workmanship forged from the gods, I thought. Then he galloped off and turned and rushed forward and hurled his spear as it screeched at my friend. Cold steel against his shield, and he deflected it with ease. From the hills above came cheers and shouts of joy, as a morale was raised sky high. "You will not escape this weapon I wield in my strong hands," he said. One could hear the hammering hooves galloping over the dry riverbed, and the lances, long and firm, were waiting for a rider to be unseated. A thundering sound, his lance met shield, and it cracked in two. Brute force had made a breach, and a spear was thrown, and it hit its mark, but the Templar's 2 layers of chainmail withstood the projectile. "Dismount, Templar, and fight on this trampled earth, and await your doom," he said. Armed to the teeth, he moved in like a cat to finish off his prey. Rushing forward, he was stopped by the assault of the Templar. The old man was quick and clever, and used his energy wisely, playing the Dark Knight's power against him. The battle raged on all day long. Everything on the battlefield seemed in slow motion, and the Spartan-born was weakening as fatigue set in. His strong arms were cramping up, but he pressed forward all the more furiously, whirling his sword at the Templar. Finally, a truce was called until sunset, and the troops prepared torches for a night battle. We huddled around our friend, taking the chainmail off to give him some relief, a strong drink of honey and herbs, and aloes and myrrhs for his wounds. As we gathered around, he spoke. "Well, my friends, I feel my age. I think I want to go home to the peace and quiet where I was born. I swear it by heaven and the all-seeing stars, I will not let you and the White Temple fall to the flames of hell." Francis spoke. "Kind sir, may we know your name? It has eluded us." "My name is Cervantes, and I come from the fair hills of Castile. I will write about you, my friends, and perhaps chase a few windmills in my retirement," said the Templar. Night came upon us too quickly, and the torches were lit. A booming voice said, "Are you ready, gallant knight?" Bravado had turned to respect for the old knight, and the Spartan was having his doubts about this folly of the Pope. Helen watched as her fate was near. The great Spartan had a heroic form. His movement was forceful but planned. He was deadly, but his profile and body were sculpted to a fine degree. Perhaps this champion was trapped like her in an incarnation and bondage not of his making. Maybe, at one time, he played with his dog and ran through the morning dew and felt the fresh wind blowing against his newborn flesh. When did the force of evil entomb him in a bloodlust of triumph to conquer and confuse man's mission on earth? Was it fate or circumstance that made him this champion of the church? Or could he not have been an initiation in the higher degree and follow the rose cross? Why did he not know that the poor body is born in one small corner of the brotherhood of man that encompasses all the heavens and beyond? We are all sons of God, and all men are thy brothers. It was a moment, but the Spartan took his eyes off the battle to gaze at Helen. His blazing eyes penetrated her soul. Suddenly, a sickening sound of bronze and steel echoed through the valley. His helmet upon his temples rang with incessant blows, as his plumes torn away by the battering of the Templar. Uncompromising, his temper sharpened, like a wounded lion as he roared in pain. The old knight had him to his knees. It was now the dark of night, and like a hurricane, the great knight hurled himself at the Templar, a whirling wind of horror, and yet the knight stood his ground. The Spartan was tired and worn, and he collapsed on the hard, dark ground. Time slowed as the armies of the church froze in disbelief at their champion's fate. As he lay there in a heap, he gazed at his foe and saw the foolishness of his pride, and with tears of defeat he awaited the coming doom. My friend spoke. "He who walks between earth and heaven, O man, would thou look upon the evil thou hast wrought? When thou didst turn thy face away from the throne of God, will you submit to his judgment? Thank you for the heavenly message brought by thee. From my dead lips a clear note is born. I humbly submit to a greater man than I, said the Spartan, and with an outstretched hand from the Templar, thus ended the slaughter that could have been, to the White Temple and Montsegur. As the Templar lifted up the battered warrior, the armies of the Pope gathered their weapons and departed Languedoc, and peace filled the valley. I knew this day was the last day I would see the Templar, for he was on his way home. He was a grand man, and later he would become immortal in the minds of men. It was just before dawn, and the birds began to sing their sweet melodies. It was time for another goodbye. That gentle soul, so kind, perhaps too kind for this savage land. He was on his way to his home in Assisi, where he felt he could fulfill his mission on earth. He gave me one of his colorful hats, and stuffed in it was a parting poem he wrote. My little sisters the birds, much are ye beholden to your God the Creator, and always and in every place ye ought to praise him, for that he hath given you double and triple vesture. He hath given you freedom to go into any place. Moreover, ye sow not, neither do ye reap, and God feedeth you and giveth you the rivers and the fountains for your drink. He giveth you the mountains and the valleys for your refuge, and the tall trees wherein to build your nests. And for as much as ye can neither spin nor sow, God clotheth you and your children. Therefore beware, little sisters mine, of the sin of ingratitude, but ever strive to praise God. I felt my journey was to remain in the White Temple and learn things I could no longer know as a vagabond. And besides, I felt closeness to Helen. Just to be near her was a joy. Granted, she seemed on a path all her own. She believed in the idea of constant progression in gradually improving vehicles and final liberation, very much like the chambered nautilus, who builds its spiral shell in chambered sections, constantly leaving the smaller ones, which it has outgrown, for the one last built. Year after year beheld the silent toil that spread his lustrous coil. Still as the spiral grew, he left the past year's dwelling for the new, stole with soft step its shining archway through, built up its idle door, stretched in his last found home, and knew the old no more. Thanks for the heavenly message brought by thee, child of the wandering sea. Cast from her lap forlorn, from the dead lips a clearer note is born than ever Triton blew from wreathed horn, while on mine ear it rings, though the deep caves of thought I hear a voice that sings. Build thee more stately mansions, O my soul, as the swift seasons roll. Leave thy low-vaulted past. Let each new temple, nobler than the last, shut thee from heaven with a dome more vast, till thou at length art free, leaving thine outgrown shell by life's unresting sea. As Abelard and I walked through the gate of the White Temple, above us, written in stone, were the words of some unknown poet. As the winds of the sea are the ways of fate, as we voyage along through life, 'tis the act of the soul that determines the goal, and not the calm or the strife.